Hey folks, we're doing something a little bit different today. Rather than a full mod breakdown, I'm going to be going over what mods make up my core list. If any of these sound cool to you, or you just want to use all of them as a base to work from yourself, there is a link to the workshop collection in the description. I'll also make sure to update that collection if any additional mods catch my eye in the future and become a more permanent inclusion in my game. Of course, this won't be anywhere near as detailed as I normally go, because that would make this video rival the length of my CE coverage. So what do I mean by my core list? I used to just run every mod that I like the look of and ignore the content that I didn't want to use on a run-by-run basis. But as you can imagine, that very quickly leads to a mod list in the 400s or 500s with simply obscene amounts of bloat to stockpile lists, clothing, food, and what potential threats you may face. And whilst a wide variety of potential danger is cool, 70 different types of leather and 100 varieties of meat that all act exactly the same isn't exactly great. So whilst the odd mod in this list might include new or expansive content, the majority of them are going to be tweaks, fixes, textures, or visual upgrades. As always, some of these mods are going to have dependencies, either official DLCs or framework, so make sure you're picking up the accompanying content where it's required. First up is the obvious one to include, Rimsort. I've already covered this in my Essentials series, Quality of Life Part 1. If you use Rimp, this does the same thing, only better, because it'll keep your mods correctly updated at all times. This was the amount of updates that I came back to after the Christmas break, and Steam had completely missed them. If you want the smoothest Rimworld experience possible, you want to use Rimsort. As for the frameworks that this mod pack utilises, if you plan on using everything, you're going to need to download Harmony, Fishery, Hugslib, Vanilla Framework Expanded, XML extensions, and the Processor Framework. All of these, besides Fishery, are available on the Steam Workshop. As for Fishery, you're going to need this for one of the main performance mods, which leads me into the next super easy grouping. I've already done an entire Essentials video on performance mods, which explains where to install Fishery from, and it'll allow you to use Performance Fish, one of the most impactful performance mods currently available. Alongside this, I'm also rolling with Prepatcher, Performance Optimizer, Red's Performance Fixes, and Rocketman. The only new one to this list that wasn't covered in the Essentials video is Red's, and it's insanely beneficial if you run a colony that makes use of a lot of animals. Not something I do very often, but I have little reason not to include the mod. It only does good things. That then leads into the meat of the video, the near 100 mods that do their thing in the background of all of my colonies. Some of these are going to have significantly more options than others, so if you're going from 0 mods to using all of these in one go, I know it's going to be a bore, but please take the time to look through your mod options so you have a vague idea of what is causing certain interactions or changing elements. It'll make it much easier to yank out something if it doesn't gel with your personal playstyle or vibe. Let's go over the super obvious inclusions first then. This is the stuff that every other YouTuber has already recommended. You've got better workbench management to make everything around crafting, cooking, and processing an absolute breeze. Going back to vanilla builds after using this is genuinely painful. The amount of flexibility of its copy and paste function will just save you an insane amount of time. CM color-coded mood bar has been semi-incorporated into the most recent version of Rimworld, but this still offers you a much clearer display for things like pregnancy, gender, bleed severity, temperature, or illnesses. It'll stop you losing a colonist to a stupid thing like them wandering around with the flu, rather than sitting down and being treated when it's not at a safe percentage ahead of its severity. Allow tool and the associated fix for ghouls that goes with it is an easy recommendation. I made a standalone video for Allow tool a while ago about what it actually includes, as it does a fair amount more than people may initially realise. Common sense will stop you pulling your hair out over idiotic choices that certain colonists may make. So no more performing open heart surgery in a filthy hospital and killing the patient because of the debuff to success chance. They'll now actually look after their surroundings as they go. Stop, drop and roll is another one that adds a little bit of sensibility to your colonists. Rather than having them run around before trying to put a fire out that's on their body, they'll skip straight to putting the fire out, as they've worked out that running around screaming isn't doing a whole lot to fix the problem. Next is Designator shapes. And man, it still blows my mind that you have to drag rooms out line by line in vanilla Rimworld. Whilst this can be a little bit fiddly to use initially as the UI isn't super clear at times, this will make designing bases that aren't just straight up boxes a lot easier, as well as giving you access to the ludicrously powerful paint bucket tool for instant flooring or conduit placement across all of your walls in a single click. This bucket tool also works fantastically with replace stuff, allowing you to upgrade from wooden walls to stone with a single click in some instances. No more needing to half deconstruct and rebuild in weird patches. Dub's Mint menus makes the UI far clearer, saving you needing to dig into information panels for individual parts by instead displaying what you want in a single click. Super useful for trying to work out the best crops for your location, or assigning a double bed when you can't remember who in your colony is married. Of course, you can't really use dubs without also using RimHud, doing a similar thing for your colonist's information panel, condensing all of the key things you want to see in a single page. RPG style inventory is purely for the visual flair on the equipment page, and it may be a little bit overkill, but it is kinda cool. If you're going to make use of it, I would suggest pairing it with quality colours and matching the colours to one another. It'll get around them using different game systems in their tiered equipment. I lean towards the World of Warcraft rarity colours. Quality Builder is a mod that, as a new player, I thought sounded insanely overpowered. It allows you to choose the quality that you want something to be built at. Of course, what I was missing was that the builder still needs to naturally hit the threshold for high quality. This simply automates the process of deconstructing and trying again, helping to ensure in the early game that you don't have a base full of awful or poor quality furniture, while still making it a lot easier in the late game to aim for a high quality hospital or a royal bedroom. This can be further assisted with things like pick up and haul and while you're up, a combo of mods that allows colonists to make the best use of their inventory while carrying things, and also allows them to perform hauls of opportunity. With work then being conducted in little and often jobs like this, it takes away from the need to have a dedicated hauler or cleaner. That's going to allow you to focus on more interesting jobs, and to aid in that, you're likely going to want no job authors, so everyone can chip in on the same unfinished item and continue working on it. If interesting jobs aren't something that your colonists can do, however, you can always use the ever faithful Quarry mod, allowing colonists to go out and work in the pit if there's nothing else to do, gathering small amounts of materials or chunks to help expand your perimeter wall. Unfortunately, the standard 1 to 4 on work priority does make that a little bit tricky to set up at times. So, for that you've got Work tab 1.5, greatly expanding the range of numbers that you have to play with and even allowing you to individually assign tasks within a work type, such as if you only wanted someone to help with butchering but not with cooking, or harvesting crops but not planting them. It can be a little overwhelming at first, but it's extremely versatile in managing how you utilise your workforce. If you're like me though, you're going to want to pair Work tab 1.5 with Capitalised work types. It's going to make the menu look a lot neater. Then you've got Smart mods, starting with Smart Speed. If you've ever been sat on 3 times watching your colony sleep or painstakingly build an entire mountain base, now you've got a faster option to zoom through all of that tedium. With colonists working that quickly though, you're also going to want smarter construction and smarter deconstruction and mining. This is going to stop people building themselves into a stone coffin, missing a section, or dropping a roof on their head. So you don't need to play foreman on large projects anymore. Your colonists actually know what they're doing now. Smart farming is going to do something similar for your green thumbed colonists, aiding them in planting seedlings when they actually have a chance of reaching maturity, giving them priority options for each field, and showing you the estimated yield and what that relates to in terms of days of food for the colony. No more time wasted planting right before winter, or rushing to harvest the cotton while people starve and the rice fields are sitting at 100%. So if your colonists are going to be smarter, you have more time to sit back and watch them work. SimpleCameraSetting gives you more zoom options as well as a handy follow camera, so you can see the entire colony at once or watch an individual go about their day to day. It packs far better performance than Camera Plus as well, so I would recommend swapping over if you're still rocking it old school. If you're going to be spending a bit more time looking at your map, you might want to make it look a bit more pretty too. The combo I use is Regrowth Core, Regrowth ReTextures, Geological Landforms, Biome Transitions, Clean Textures, Vanilla Textures Expanded, Graphics Settings Plus, and the JGH Retexture Pack. Regrowth expanded world generation and map preview will also then go a long way in helping you pick a suitably beautiful starting spot as well. After all, what's the point in having all of these amazing map improvements if you don't actually get to see them very often? If you are going to add all of these mods to make the world look more beautiful for you, make it count for your colonists too. Beautiful outdoors will rebalance the outdoor beauty values so that pawns are actually happy to be surrounded by nature, rather than complaining about grass. Some other visual improvements that you can add that are heavier on the performance side of things are simple smoke, simple splashes, and scattered flames. Whilst these can make the game look insanely pretty, if you have a flash storm and half of your map is on fire, you're going to struggle to get above 1x speed in most cases. Simple smoke is the biggest offender of this group by far. For a visual mod that also adds in a bit of functionality too, Something's Float is going to make water look absolutely stunning, and also allow you to turn rivers into a slow moving corpse disposal system, like the world's worst water park ride. Let's transition now into some smaller stuff that can go a long way in saving you a headache or two with certain colonies. Auto strip on haul is an absolute godsend if you're playing as cannibals. Your entire base isn't going to be littered with tainted clothing anymore with this mod settings. It also allows you to still grab utility items and useful gear. It's just a massive time saver. Auto Night Owl is going to help with scheduling by making it immediately clear who would rather be on a flipped sleep cycle. No more mood debuffs because you forgot to check traits. You can even set this to automatically work with darkness ideologies or light sensitive xenotypes too. Custom prisoner interactions is highly customizable and will automatically set preferred actions on captured raiders. I find Reduce Resistance, Convert then Recruit to be the best setup, as it gets around Crisis of Confidence drops in Ideology that can occur if you convert someone first, and then try and do all of the work on Resistance afterwards. Prison Commons is also going to give you the option to provide a more appealing area for prisoners to wander around in and eat whilst they're awake, making it much easier to stack some beauty bonuses to buff their mood and increase the impact your wardens have when lowering their resistance, as you only need one pretty commons room rather than multiple nice cells. Drag Select makes it super easy to dump all of your stock at a trader, or assign everything in one sweep across the drug tab. Handy indeed. Fists Aren't Made of Steel is going to stop prisoners absolutely battering their way out of cell doors or walls, because seriously, can you imagine how beyond broken your hand would be if you tried to break down a steel door with punches? Floors Are Almost Worthless lets you focus on building more interesting flooring without absolutely murdering your colony wealth. Now you can have fancy carpets without incurring the wrath of over 100 tribals. Ground Targeter lets you hold shift whilst using an AoE weapon to manually aim for a spot on the ground instead of a specific target. So you can land grenades or rockets ahead of enemies and have them walk into it, instead of frequently shooting past them. PawnTargetFix works very well alongside this in adjusting the priority of ranged combatants. Your gunners are going to take aim at enemies that are charging into melee first, rather than constantly trying to pick off the guys in the back that pose zero threat to them. Random's Gene Assistant is great if you're using biotech. It colour codes genes to show if you have them stored in a bank or not. If you want to make it even easier to stay on top of harvesting new gene packs in your colony too, pair it with Auto Extract Genes, which will safely perform extractions when the target's genes have regrown. It gives you more opportunities to find that exact gene pack you're looking for. If you're using Ideology and make next to no use of the styling station because it's way too micromanagey, grab Self-Dyeing and turn it on. Colonists will now automatically apply either the Ideology colour, their favourite colour, or both, depending on how you set it up, provided you've got some dye in storage, of course. It makes for much more varied looks around your base and it saves you a lot of time. Smarter Visitors is basically essential if you're using Anomaly, given some of the threats that will generate on your map. It allows you to tell any visitors to wait a little bit longer before leaving, stopping them from blindly wandering into a horde of shamblers or passing right by a flesh mass. If you find visitors are still insisting on getting themselves dead, and it's hitting your reputation negatively, it's time to install Not My Fault and just leave them to it. This removes the reputation penalty for others dying when it's entirely outside of your control. If you're also to the point of the game where raids that show up are packing 75 or more targets, you might want to grab No Random Relations. It'll help massively with all of the aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents and the like that the game will arbitrarily generate and assign to hostile factions. No more mood debuffs for having to put down your murderous grandma. For something that's going to help if you're doing an Anomaly run and find your Monolith spawned in a abysmal position, give Move Your Monolith a go. It makes it much easier to create a dedicated space around it for cult-like worship, or shift out of the way of some prime real estate, like fertile ground or a good killbox location. Be sure to check out the mod pages for most things made by Fernie for hidden deep lore and insane levels of shitposting. All Ideologies Are Fluid is a great fix if you're using Ideology. It allows you to make a fixed ideology from the start and still play with the fluid points and reformation system, so you can have multiple memes and high impact choices from the get-go. Kidnapped pawns die less gives you at least some chance of meeting a stolen colonist again, as the default game logic has next to no chance of saving them. It heals only a single wound every 3 hours. Now they get tended 9 times faster, so provided they left the map with at least 2 hours until death remaining, they should survive, and you might get a quest pop to go and rescue them in the future. No crushed bodies is another one that can help with bringing colonists back, as while it won't stop a mountain collapse from being lethal, it doesn't utterly destroy the body with this mod installed, giving you an opportunity to use a resurrection serum and return them to life. In terms of not being utterly destroyed by something, Ugh, You Got Me will greatly decrease the chance of potentially lethal social fights. So whilst colonists will still mess each other up in a fistfight, they won't occasionally decide to decapitate their opponent anymore. Stabilize will help when someone does get absolutely fragged by giving you a simple right click option that allows you to perform emergency tending anywhere in the world. No more needing to drag someone back to a medical spot or have meds on hand at all times. Now you can apply some pressure or tie off a potentially lethal bleed. The quality isn't going to be great and infection is super likely, but it's better than being dead. Ugly Together is great if you're running a colony of 4chan users that frequently get into fights over who has worse acne. Now any colonist with a beauty debuff will treat others that are facially challenged with respect rather than malice. Useful Terror actually gives skull spikes, gibbet cages and suppression more of an impact, with effects lasting hours rather than only being active in the immediate vicinity. You'll find that your group of violently encouraged non-colonist workers are now far less likely to revolt as they accumulate and retain terror. Haul After Slaughter is a small fix that helps with large-scale animal culling. Each slaughtered animal is now correctly dragged back to a stockpile instead of being left to slowly rot in the field. No more wasting any meat and leather. Automatic stump chopping lets you net a couple of extra wood for every tree, and saves you needing to manually remark all stumps for chopping too. It also stops YouTube comments from going mad when you leave your stumps scattered around the base, because you apparently didn't realise it was such a hot button issue. Better ground penetrating scanner will help you find the resource you actually built the thing for by allowing you to target resources at the cost of it taking longer to scan. So no more back-to-back jade veins when you're screaming for steel. It also gives the building a handy buff by allowing it to work passively, at a slower rate than if it was manned. If you're going to make use of the ground penetrating scanner too, do yourself a favour and install coloured deep resources. Your eyeballs are going to thank you for some visual indication as to what the hell you're actually looking at. Food poison stack fix is something that really should have been patched into the game by now, but it isn't. So make sure you've got it enabled to avoid food poisoning spirals, as any fresh meals added to a tainted stack also become poisoned, which leads to you needing to watch the freezer like a hawk to figure out what is responsible for your dining room becoming a vomit skating rink. And with that lovely imagery, Healer Mech Serum choice is something to save you the headache of trying to aim for a specific effect when a colonist has multiple problems, as at times the game can deem what you consider trivial to be a more important injury. Now you can pick exactly what malady you would like to cure and be done with it. Better Info Card is useful if you're frequently comparing gear or stats side by side, as it lets you move, resize, filter and stack different info panels all over your screen. Not something everyone's going to need, but it's useful if you're a numbers nerd like me. You've got a couple of options for some extra spots in the game. Trade Ships Drop Spot and Trading Spot, which allows you to better define where goods are flung at you from orbit or where visiting caravans are going to go and hang out. It's extremely helpful if you find that Pack Muffalo are constantly trampling all over your nice floors. To go with these trade spots, you might also want to install TraderGen, which gives orbital traders specializations on top of their defined type. So you could get an exotic trader that deals more heavily in biological materials, or a bulk goods trader that focuses on minerals. It's a nice little twist that makes traders less static. One final tweak for traders is Just Put It Over There, which has traders drop off your recent purchases in a stockpile rather than dumping them on the floor, which can potentially cause a little bit of wear and tear if they drop it off in bad weather conditions. Just be aware that if you're using mods like Traits Expanded, things like Absent Minded can cause traders to stop what they're doing and fail to deliver your purchase. Okay, let's cover some more subjective stuff now. Things that I think sound super cool but might be really lame to you. It's entirely down to personal playstyle, but these fit mine really well. Automatic job titles. I have seen reports that this can cause performance issues, but I've not noticed them myself. It might be due to how some players have the mod set up, but it adds a nice bit of flavour to mix up your colonists. Blood animations. This makes combat awesome as far as I'm concerned. Absolute buckets of viscera get splattered when bullets start flying, but this might be a bit too much for others. It's also a similar story with Death Acidfest. Thematically, I find it awesome, but some people might not like the idea of armies of skeletons being left on their doorstep. Alpha memes and vanilla Ideology Expanded memes and structures. These are by far the two biggest content mods I'm going to mention in this video. But if you're using Ideology and playing without them, you are doing yourself a massive disservice. These two mods by themselves change the order that I would recommend buying the DLCs, as without them installed, I would honestly say that Royalty has more to offer than standard Ideology does. Compositable Loadouts is something I personally love to use, but I know that it makes some people scratch their heads. I have created an entire video about it that better explains its functionality and why I find it great, but it is a bit of work to get to grips with the first few times you try and use it. Disable automatically selecting travel supplies is so damn niche, but it saves me one click, so I'm always going to recommend it. It's very useful if you're sending people to outposts pretty regularly or doing quests that are extremely close and don't need a handful of food and meds. Gardens is handy if you'd like to make scattered flower beds and varied outdoor spaces, but it's entirely cosmetic and the same effect can be achieved with multiple grow zones. This is just a bit quicker. Mend and Recycle is going to be pretty hotly contested by some, as it's player power creep to an insane degree. Repair mechanics aren't in Rimworld as standard to try and keep a constant drain ticking on your supplies for new clothes and armour, but it bugs the crap out of me to constantly have to bin tattered gear or launch it away. So I just repair things now and don't sit on quite so many resources all of the time. Ogre Stack is another one that some people are going to scream about being OP. It massively ups the stack size for resources. It saves you space in terms of base building and shelving. Does it mean that I don't have to build such large, expensive bases as my stockpile expands? Yes. Is expanding or building more storerooms something I find interesting or particularly challenging to do? No. So I made the call some time ago to cut the tedious nature of some jobs, and I've enjoyed the game a lot more since doing so. In the same vein as that, I use optimization meats to cut down on the ridiculous amounts of meats available in the game and condense them into one that has exactly the same stats as all the other varieties. If a meat does have a unique effect to it, this mod ignores condensing it and allows it to work as it should. It's just something to cut down on needless bloat and condense what could be 20 stacks into a single large pile. Packs are not belts will change the balance of some utility items, especially if you're using vanilla accessories, by allowing you to combine a belt and a backpack. Something you're going to need to decide if you consider too powerful or not, but this often allows me the flexibility to actually use some utility items I would have completely ignored under other circumstances. Scrollable Gizmos is great if you're running mods that include a lot of structures and find that your UI is rapidly overtaking the entire screen. It happens to me even faster because I play on a 1.25 scale. This caps the size for each bar and adds the ability to use the mouse wheel up and down, keeping the main focus of the screen clutter free. Safe storage, outfit, crafting, drug and operation settings is super useful if you run new colonies pretty frequently. removing the hassle of needing to remake your default settings for things like allowed food, clothing, drugs, and the like. If you tend to play one colony for a very long time, you're not going to get as much mileage out of this. Dub's break mod shifts the parameters for how minor, major, and extreme mental breaks work. To me, this makes much more sense, and given that Grim Reality hasn't seen a 1.5 patch yet to stop the launchers screaming about it, Dubs is the best solution to the sometimes weird choices for values when it comes to mood offsets in Rimworld. Rebuild Doors and Corners is a more recent mod that I use all the time now. The textures tie in really well with my previously mentioned visual overhauls, and it's very true to the vanilla style. Some people may find this a little bit more content heavy in terms of what they want from it though, with it adding a fair amount of new walls, doors, and floors. Ultimate Storyteller is my constant go-to. In terms of a rounded storyteller that doesn't have any unique twists or mechanics, it's simply the most engaging and interactive. It might be a little bit too trigger happy for a player that's still trying to learn the ropes, and for those who know Rimworld well, you might want something more specific for your run than Randy Random off his head on Yayo. That leaves the last two mods to mention and a few additions to pair alongside them. I mention these mods together as whilst they both do different things, they do tread some of the same ground, so you need to compare back and forth between them to make sure they aren't fighting one another to do certain things. You have Tweaks Galore and Frozen Snow Fox tweaks, with the Anomaly, Camp, and Complex loot mods to go alongside it. These are mods that you really need to sit down and spend the time checking what they do, as they have the potential to change absolutely loads, which means what I use these mods for may be dramatically different to what you use them for. For instance, I set my chunks to stack as 5s rather than single entities. I have gene banks set to 8 rather than 4. I use metal flammability fixes, filth washes away rain, boomalopes bleed chemfuel, comm stations can be used for recreation, there's no lethal damage threshold, hay doesn't rot in an ambient temperature, lag-free lamps is turned on, and the list goes on. And not only did these mods include settings for themselves, they have further interaction with other mods that I've listed here, like improved cleaning for Common Sense from Frozen Snow Fox, or unlocking fishing traps from Vanilla Ideology Expanded for all colonies. Whilst you can throw a lot of the mods I've previously mentioned into your game and just kinda roll with it, these last couple need a really solid look over when you're using them, as they can quite dramatically change your game. Some honourable mentions that aren't part of my list all the time, but used to be, include interaction bubbles, which I normally use when streaming the game for a live audience, but for recording footage and in my own personal time, I find it clutters the screen a little bit too often. It's the same story with labels on floor. Ignoring its performance issues, it made it very easy for people to quickly understand what each room, stockpile, or crop was at a glance. So it might be useful for newer players when designating a space, but if you're more familiar with the game and you don't need it as a visual aid anymore, you will save yourself a few ticks by not using it. Ignorance is Bliss is extremely important in certain themed runs. I used to keep it on all the time and tweak the settings as required for each colony, as it's going to limit what enemies show up based on your own tech level. However, using this in every run leads to extremely samey feeling threats. Sometimes it's nice to be thrown the odd curveball. Everybody Gets One also used to be a staple in my collection, but it's become harder to recommend as it's the only mod making use of an entire framework with my current setup, so rather than falling back on this specific crafting build, I've just tweaked how I build these days. It still allows me to make sure that I've got spares in storage for new recruits, and when combined with compositable loadouts, it ensures people are wearing exactly what I want. Another mod I'd recommend throwing on, maybe once every month or so, is use this instead, as whilst you won't need this on all the time, it's going to make sure that you're using the most supported option of any mod you have installed, directing you towards continued or branched versions that are still being updated, rather than the sometimes abandoned main mod. And that covers it. Hopefully from this you've got at least 1 or 2 new things to try, and if you did go from using absolutely no mods to installing this entire pack, firstly, I wish you the best of luck, and secondly, I hope these all serve you well. It's taken me a little while to cultivate, trim and refine this list into something that's not only economical in terms of load time and performance impact, but also practical, in that none of these mods are having large, unexpected interactions with the majority of popular content packs out there. Unless you throw on CE. In which case, I mean, come on, it's CE. Of course there's going to be compatibility issues. The main ones you're going to get from these mod suggestions list stem from Compositable Loadouts, which fights against the loadout system that CE uses, and Boomerlope's Bleeding Chem Fuel from Tweets Galore. You find that they essentially turn into walking incendiary taps. I'm going to go out on a limb though and assume that if anyone is running CE, you already know how to identify culprits in your mod list and yank out the troublemakers when problems arise. If you'd like to see the current suggestion list for mod rundowns, it's available to view on my Patreon page. All the posts there are totally free to read and it's pinned at the very top. You can support me in producing content like this for just £1 a month. It gets your name in the credits for these videos and it helps me to stay alive. If you're watching this in real time, we're about to move into a very alpha January. And probably February because there's more alpha mods coming out every day. Thanks for watching folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld Mod Rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.